Welcome back, everyone. Ready to dive deep into overthinking, specifically how it sneaks into your relationships.
Always a relevant topic, right?
Oh, absolutely. We've got three sources lined up to kind of dissect today.
Okay, sounds good.
So one is totally focused on relationship overthinking, then another one's more about like the general psychology of it, just overthinking in general.
Hmm.
And then our last one is all about tactics to break free, straight from the psychologists themselves. So our mission today, should we choose to accept it, is to uncover those patterns, see how they impact us,
Low good mission.
and arm ourselves with some tools to fight back.
Think of it as like building a toolkit for a calmer mind,
Yeah.
you know, and stronger relationships.
That's a great way to put it. And speaking of tools and fighting back, the article from Greater Good by Alicia Munoz, she's a therapist, jumps right into what she calls relationship rumination cycles. Ready to unpack those?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so she's got 5. Blame, control, doubt, worry, and self-pity. And at first when I read that list, I was like, is it really that simple? But, the more I thought about it, the more it felt like
Yeah.
these are the traps we all fall into sometimes.
I think what's fascinating is, yeah, we all experience these to some degree, but most people kind of have a go-to,
Helpful?
a dominant cycle.
Oh, interesting.
Like, when a storm's coming, some folks run for cover, others are boarding up the windows, and
Right.
some people just freeze.
Right.
Knowing which one you do,
Yeah.
that's key to navigating the whole, anxiety of it all.
I love that. So it's not just, am I overthinking? It's, how do I specifically overthink in my relationship? Which cycle is my default? So as you listen, ask yourself, which of these really hits home for you?
Yeah.
Is it blaming your partner for past stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Constantly wanting to control things? Or maybe it's that self-pity, hoping to be rescued.
And keep in mind, these aren't necessarily exclusive. You might find yourself kind of swirling through a few, depending on what's going on. But knowing your main pattern is a good first step, I think, to figuring out what's driving that overthinking in the first place.
And that leads us perfectly into the difference between overthinking and actually solving problems, which the Very Well Mind article explains so well. They use this storm analogy. And it's like the overthinker is standing right in the path of the storm, obsessed with how bad the damage could be,
Oh, yeah.
and just feeling helpless.
While the problem solver, they're focused on doing something. They're bringing stuff inside, gathering supplies, maybe even helping their neighbors get ready too.
Yeah.
They see the threat, but they use that energy to actually take action.
And you can see how this plays out in relationships, right? Like, let's say you and your partner disagree about something.
Mm-hmm.
The overthinker might obsess over every word, every little inflection in their voice, analyzing it to death. But they're not actually dealing with the problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The problem solver, they focus on talking it out, finding a compromise.
Yeah.
They might say something like, okay, we don't see eye to eye here, but how do we fix this? So they acknowledge the storm's there, but they're building a bridge instead of getting swept away.
Now, some of you might be thinking, okay, overthinking, bad, got it. But is it really such a big deal?
Right.
Well, Very Well Mind and Ladders, they don't sugarcoat it at all.
Yeah.
They talk about the impact on your mental health, on your relationships, even on your sleep. It's not just thinking too much. It can actually cause some serious problems.
It really is like a storm wearing you down.
Yeah.
Very well. Mind talks about how chronic overthinking is linked to depression, anxiety, even PTSD.
Wow.
And it creates this vicious cycle. Stress makes you overthink, which just makes your mental health worse.
And I thought it was really interesting how Ladders connected it to, the dynamics in a relationship. It breeds assumptions, misinterpretations, fights. It can lead to needing constant reassurance, trying to control your partner, and that just erodes the trust and intimacy, the foundation of the whole thing.
It's almost like trying to build on unsteady ground. Every little tremor, every little thing that feels off, it just triggers all this anxiety that could topple the whole structure.
And don't forget the sleep deprivation. Very well. Mind makes a really good point that overthinking messes with your sleep, which then makes you more anxious and more likely to overthink. It's this relentless cycle that feels impossible to break.
Sleep deprivation, it's a sneaky one. It really undermines your ability to be resilient emotionally. Makes it so much harder to manage all that anxiety.
Okay, so we've laid out the problem. We see the impact. So now, how about some solutions? What can we actually do to calm the storm? to build on solid ground.
Well, thankfully, all three sources, they offer some strategies. We're going to dig into those, starting with a few that really stood out to me.
Okay.
But I do want to say, before we get into it, these are, tools, not magic wands.
Right.
It takes practice, it takes self-awareness, and sometimes even professional help to really break free from chronic overthinking.
That's a really good point. No quick fixes, but there are steps we can take to get back in control. We're not saying we can, you know, banish the storm entirely,
Yeah,
but we can help you learn how to weather it better.
exactly. So let's start unpacking that toolkit, shall we?
Yeah.
One simple but surprisingly effective technique Very Well Mind talks about is distraction. Now, I know that sounds kind of counterintuitive, but shifting your focus to something else can actually give your mind the space it needs to process things in the background.
It's like taking a break from staring at the storm clouds and actually, doing something productive instead.
Right.
Sometimes the answer comes to you more clearly when you're not hyper-focused on the problem.
And what's great about distraction is that it can be anything you enjoy. Some people like creative stuff, others need to move their bodies, and some folks just need a change of scenery. Even just going for a walk can do wonders for resetting your mental state.
Yeah, the key is to find what works for you, something that truly engages your mind and lets those anxieties settle in the background. Distraction. It's like hitting pause on that overthinking storm. And speaking of calming techniques, the latter's article had me thinking about mindfulness.
Ah, yes. Mindfulness. It's, more than just a buzzword. It's a practice that can totally change how you relate to your own thoughts.
It's that whole being present thing, right?
Yeah.
Noticing how you feel, what you're thinking, but not judging yourself for it. Like
Exactly.
instead of getting lost in the what ifs, you're just observing those thoughts like clouds passing by, not getting caught in the storm itself.
It's about shifting your focus away from all those mental what ifs and should haves and bringing it back to what's actually happening around you. What can you see, hear, smell, feel, that kind of thing.
And what I like about mindfulness is that anyone can do it anytime. It's not like you need special equipment or have to go on a retreat.
Right.
It's about just being more aware in your everyday life.
And the more you practice, the easier it gets.
Yeah.
You start to catch yourself when you're spiraling, and you can gently bring your attention back to the present moment. It's like working out a muscle, strengthening your ability to choose where you focus your energy.
Speaking of mental muscles, Very Well Aim brought up something I thought was interesting. The link between overthinking and perfectionism.
Perfectionism, can be such a trap, right? It's like
Mm.
you set this impossible standard for yourself and then beat yourself up when you inevitably fall short.
It's exhausting. And I think it creates the perfect breeding ground for overthinking. If you're always trying to be perfect, you'll never feel good enough. You're constantly finding something to criticize, some flaw to obsess over.
Yeah. And that can spill over into your relationships too. It can lead to all this second guessing,
Yeah.
and self-doubt.
Hmm.
You overanalyze every interaction with your partner, looking for hidden meanings that probably aren't even there.
Or you try to control everything to make it perfect, which, let's face it, never works out the way you hope. Relationships are messy. People are imperfect. And I think embracing that is so important for breaking free from that perfectionism trap.
Totally. Very well. Mine talks about cultivating self-compassion. Like, be kind to yourself,
Yeah.
treat yourself the way you'd treat a friend who is going through the same thing.
I love that.
Instead of putting yourself down, you acknowledge that, yeah, everyone makes mistakes. It's about learning from those experiences and really remembering that you're worthy no matter what.
So true. And that feeling of self-worth, it's essential for having healthy relationships, right?
Oh, absolutely. When you're secure in yourself, you're less likely to project your own insecurities onto your partner.
Okay, so let's switch gears a bit. The Greater Good article, they go into how overthinking messes with communication in relationships. And, I think we've all been there at some point.
Communication is like the foundation of any good relationship, right? And when overthinking gets in the way, it can really start to create problems.
Yeah. The article talks about how it leads to all these assumptions, misinterpretations. You even get defensive. You start reading into everything your partner does or says, looking for some hidden meaning or motive that might not even be there.
It's like seeing the world through a distorted lens.
Yeah.
Every gesture, every tone of voice, it all gets filtered through your own anxieties.
And that can lead to arguments, misunderstandings, this growing resentment.
Yeah.
You end up speaking totally different languages even when you're using the same words.
So how do we navigate this?
Yeah.
How do we avoid all these communication landmines? Well, Greater Good suggest practicing something called active listening.
Hmm.
Takes some conscious effort, but it can be so powerful.
Okay, tell me more.
Active listening, it's about truly tuning in to what your partner is saying. Not just the words, but their body language, their tone of voice, everything. And then you reflect back what you heard to make sure you're understanding them correctly.
So it's like what I'm hearing you say is, or it sounds like you're feeling.
Exactly. You acknowledge their perspective, and it helps make sure you're both on the same page.
I can see how that would prevent a lot of misunderstandings and arguments. It shows your partner that you're present, that you care about what they have to say.
Exactly. And it opens the door for empathy. It helps you connect with your partner's feelings, even if you don't necessarily agree with their point of view.
And the article also mentioned using I statements when you talk about your feelings and needs.
Oh, yes, I statements. They're so helpful for expressing yourself without, blaming or accusing your partner.
So instead of saying, you never listen to me,
Hmm.
you'd say something like, I feel unheard when I'm trying to talk to you.
Exactly. It shifts the focus. You're not attacking them. You're just expressing how you feel. And that can be really powerful, especially in a tense situation.
It feels less like an attack and more like an invitation to have a real conversation, right?
Exactly. I statements, they invite dialogue, not defensiveness. They create space for understanding, for, working through things together.
And lastly, the Greater Good article talked about creating a safe space for open and honest communication.
This is so important. It's about building an environment where both of you feel comfortable sharing what's on your mind without feeling judged or criticized.
It's about being respectful, even when you disagree, and really listening to each other.
Yeah, that's it.
Building that kind of foundation, I can see how that would go a long way in reducing those anxieties that fuel overthinking.
Now, we've been talking about managing overthinking on a personal level,
Hmm.
individually, but how about as a couple?
That's a good question.
What can you both do to create a more supportive and understanding dynamic?
That's a fantastic point. It's not about, me versus my overthinking. It's about us together versus this challenge. And all three sources actually touch on some great ways to do that as a team.
Greater Good really emphasizes empathy and validation.
Hmm.
It's about actively trying to see things from your partner's perspective, even if you don't completely agree with it.
It's like saying, I get where you're coming from, and I understand why you feel this way. It's about letting them know that their feelings matter, that you hear them.
Exactly. Validation isn't about agreeing. It's about creating space for your partner to feel heard, to feel respected. And sometimes that alone can really help to de-escalate anxieties and make things feel more supportive.
Very well. Yeah. Mine, they take a different approach, and they focus on setting boundaries.
Boundaries are important in any relationship, of course,
Yeah.
but they become even more crucial when you're dealing with overthinking.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It could be setting limits on how much you're going to talk about a certain issue, agreeing to take breaks when things get too intense, or maybe even just being clear about your expectations around communication.
So it's about having those ground rules in place, so to speak.
Exactly. Boundaries help prevent overthinking from spiraling out of control and creating unnecessary conflict. They create a structure for healthy communication. And it protects both partners from feeling overwhelmed or drained emotionally.
And then ladders, they offer a really interesting idea, actually creating a plan together for dealing with overthinking.
I love this. It's about seeing overthinking not as some individual burden to bear, but as a challenge you're facing as a team.
So it's about collaborating, right? Like
Huh?
figuring out each other's triggers,
Yeah.
brainstorming ways to cope, and agreeing on how you'll support each other when those anxious thoughts come up.
Maybe it's a code word, a calming ritual, or even just a promise to listen without judgment, whatever works.
And having a plan like that in place can make a world of difference. It fosters this sense of unity, of shared responsibility. It reminds you both that you're not alone in this. It's about creating that we're in this together feeling, which can be really empowering. So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with something to think about. How can you and your partner create a more mindful and supportive dynamic? What are some small changes you can start making today to foster open communication, empathy, and validation? So far, we've been looking at like these big picture strategies, right, for managing overthinking in general. But let's get down to some specific anxieties that tend to pop up in relationships.
Okay.
Those everyday worries that, if we're not careful, can turn into like full-blown mental hurricanes.
It's like you've got all the tools, the hammers, the screwdrivers,
Yeah.
but you don't know which one to use for what. We
Exactly.
need to be a little more targeted.
Okay, so let's start with one I think a lot of people can relate to, especially with, all the dating apps these days. The fear of being ghosted. That sudden silence, no replies to your texts. It's brutal.
Oh, it is. The Greater Good article actually touches on this, and I think they have some really good advice. First off, it's important to acknowledge those feelings.
Mhm.
It's totally normal to feel hurt, confused, even a little panicked when someone just disappears on you.
Don't try to brush it off or pretend it doesn't bother you.
Let yourself feel those emotions.
Because if you bottle them up, they're just going to come out in other ways, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But here's the key. Don't let your emotions control what you do. The article warns against, those impulsive reactions.
Mm.
Blowing up their phone with texts, making accusations. That's just going to make things worse.
It's like throwing gasoline on a fire.
Yeah. Instead, take a breath,
Yeah.
and try to look at the situation a little more calmly, rationally.
Yeah. Remind yourself that there could be other reasons they're not responding. Maybe they're just busy or something came up. We tend to jump to the worst case scenario, but usually it's something way less dramatic.
Right. And Greater Good, they suggest giving your partner the benefit of the doubt. Wait a bit before you reach out again.
Yeah.
And when you do, keep it simple. No need for the drama, just a casual, hey, haven't heard from you. Just wanted to check in.
Okay, so let's switch gears to another common one. Jealousy. This is a monster that can really wreck a relationship.
Oh, the green-eyed monster for sure. Social media stalking, suspicious questions, trying to control your partner's every move.
Yeah. And very well, they had some great tips for this one, too.
What I really liked was their emphasis on figuring out the root of the jealousy.
Right, where is it coming from?
Yeah, exactly. Is it insecurity, past experiences, or maybe there's actually something your partner's doing that's causing it?
Mm-hmm.
It's about digging a little deeper,
Yeah.
understand the why. Yeah. And once you know where it's coming from, you can start to address it in a healthier way.
So if it's insecurity, maybe it's about focusing on your self-esteem, remembering all the amazing things about you, the things you bring to the relationship.
It's about finding that security within yourself, not relying on someone else for it. Because when you feel good about yourself, you're less likely to see threats everywhere.
And if it's something your partner's actually doing, well, then it's important to have that open and honest conversation. Tell them how you feel.
But come from a place of vulnerability, not blame.
Right.
Don't attack. Share your feelings. Tell them what you need. But try to avoid those you statements that just put people on the defensive.
It's about working together to find a solution that makes you both feel secure.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. Speaking of communication, let's talk about the fear of conflict. This one can be a silent killer in relationships.
Yeah, the whole conflict avoidance thing, it might feel okay in the moment, but it can create bigger problems later on.
It's like ignoring a tiny crack in your house's foundation. Might seem small now, but if you don't fix it, the whole thing could crumble.
Exactly. When you keep things bottled up, avoid dealing with issues, that resentment just builds and builds. And it comes out in all sorts of unhealthy ways, like passive aggression, withdrawing emotionally, sometimes even exploding out of nowhere.
The Ladders article, they had a really interesting take on this. They talked about how we need to shift our perspective on conflict.
Okay.
Instead of seeing it as a bad thing, they suggest seeing it as a chance to grow, to understand each other better.
So conflict is an opportunity.
Yeah, it's an opportunity to figure out what each person needs, to set boundaries and find solutions together. You work through it as a team, and it can actually make your bond stronger.
And remember those I statements we were talking about? They're so important here. You can express yourself without making your partner feel like they're being attacked. It's all about your own experience.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's okay to take breaks too, right? If things are getting too heated, you can always step away, cool down, and come back when you're both ready to talk calmly.
Sometimes just that pause is all it takes to switch the energy from fighting to problem solving. Now, as we wrap up our overthinking deep dive, I want to circle back to something Ladders said. Focus on the positive.
Oh, that's so important.
Especially when you're prone to overthinking, it's easy to get stuck in that negative loop.
Yeah.
But it's like they say, what you focus on expands. If you're always looking for problems, you're going to find them. But the same goes for good things, too.
Absolutely. So take time to appreciate your partner, express gratitude, notice those small moments of joy and connection.
Yeah, focus on the good stuff. The little things they do, the laughs you share.
It's about nurturing that positive energy and remembering why you're together in the first place.
So there you have it. our deep dive into the world of overthinking in relationships. We looked at the patterns, the impact, and most importantly, how to get your peace of mind back and build stronger connections.
And remember, overthinking, it's common, but it is manageable. When you understand your triggers, learn how to challenge those thoughts, and develop some good coping skills, you can navigate the ups and downs of relationships with so much more confidence and clarity.
And if you're struggling, don't be afraid to reach out for help. A therapist can give you personalized support and teach you the tools you need to deal with all that relationship anxiety.
And remember that question we left you with.
Oh, yeah. What's your tortoise holding a rose?
What image, what activity, what question helps you quiet those anxious thoughts?
Turn on to that,
That's your source of strength.
as you navigate all the joys and challenges of being in a relationship.
Because you have more control over your thoughts than you think. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone.
See you next time.
We'll catch you next time, Curious Minds.